Yuri, the sociopath from the Fusion Dimension, and wielder of the Fusion Dimension Dragon. Yuri served directly under Leo Akaba to aid in capturing the Bracelet Girls. He was always there, at each encounter, constantly antagonizing duelists like Yugo and Yuya while trying to capture Zuzu and Selena. Once he realized the power of the other Dimension Dragons, however, he realized his own goal of merging back into one with the other Zark fragments. To do this, he made Yuya as angry as possible by riling him up the entire time he dueled his dad, Yusho Sakaki. Once he challenged Yuya himself, he gained control of 3 of the 4 Dimension Dragons before being defeated. Despite being defeated, he accepted it with open arms, as no matter the result, it ended with Zark's resurrection. It's been nearly 9 years since the end of Arc 5, and up to extremely recently, Yuri's Predaplants have received multiple waves of support, including some that is currently still only available in the OCG, so if you're watching this in the future, and certain card names are different, that's why. Starting off, we'll look at the level 1 Predaplants Cordyceps, Biplisp, and Saraceniant. By the way, if I mispronounce any Predaplant monster names, it's just going to be how it is. During the player's standby phase, Cordyceps can be banished from the graveyard to summon 2 low-level Predaplants from the graveyard, but the player can only fusion summon monsters for the rest of the turn, and they cannot normal summon or set monsters. If Biplisp is sent to the grave, it searches another Predaplant. If a monster with a predator counter is on the field, Biplisp can summon itself, but it gets banished when it leaves the field. Saraceniant can summon itself when the opponent declares a direct attack. After damage calculation when it battles, it can destroy that opponent's monster. If it's destroyed or sent from the field to the grave by a card effect, Saraceniant can search a Predap card. On to the level 2s, we have Predaplants Flytrap, Chlamydia Sundew, and Squid Drosera. Once per turn, Flytrap can target an opponent's monster to place a predator counter on it. All effects that place predator counters also include an effect that, if a monster that's level 2 or higher has a predator counter on it, they become level 1 as long as they have that counter. Just establishing that as a rule so I don't have to bring it up every single time. At the start of the damage step, when Flytrap battles a monster with an equal or lower level, it can destroy that monster, then it gains the original level of that monster and adds it to its own. Chlamydia Sundew treats monsters with predator counters as dark attributes when fusion summoning. During the main phase, Chlamydia Sundew can conduct a fusion summon using monsters from the hand, field, and monsters the opponent controls with predator counters, but it has to use itself as fusion material as well. Squid Drosera can send itself from the hand to the graveyard to target a face-up monster the player controls, enabling it to attack all monsters the opponent controls with predator counters that turn once each. If Squid Drosera is face-up and leaves the field, it can place a predator counter on each special summoned monster the opponent controls. On to the level 3s, we have Predaplants Terrapenthes, Darlingtonia Cobra, Ophrys Scorpio, and the new Lilizard. When Terrapenthes deals battle damage, it can target one of the opponent's face-up monsters and place a predator counter on it. Once per turn, it can target and take control of an opponent's monster with a level less than or equal to its own until the end phase. If Darlingtonia Cobra is summoned by the effect of a Predaplant monster, it can search a polymerization spell or fusion spell, but this effect can only be used once per duel. Cobra is usually the monster summoned off of Ophrys Scorpio when it's normal or special summoned. It can discard a monster and summon a Predaplant from the deck. If the player controls a Predaplant or Starving Venom monster, Lilizard can summon itself from the hand, then search Polymerization. Once per turn, Lilizard can target a monster on the field and change its attribute to Dark. If it's summoned from the grave, Lilizard can draw a card. For the level 4 Predaplants, we have Moray Nepenthes and Spinodionea. Moray Nepenthes gains 200 attack for each predator counter on the field. When it destroys an opponent's monster in battle, it can equip that monster to itself. Once per turn, it can destroy a monster equipped to it to gain life points equal to its attack points. If Spinodionea is summoned, it can target and place a predator counter on an opponent's face-up monster. After damage calculation, if Spinodionea battled an opponent's monster with equal or lower level, it can summon another Predaplant from the deck. For our high-level Predaplants, we have the level 5 Drosiphyllum Hydra and level 8 Heliamphorhynchus. Drosiphyllum Hydra can summon itself from the hand or grave by tributing a monster on either field with a predator counter, but it can only be summoned once per turn that way. If it's on the field or in the grave, it can use a quick effect to banish another Predaplant from the grave, then target a monster on the field and sink it by 500 attack points. Heliamphorhynchus can summon itself if the opponent controls a monster with a predator counter. If it's destroyed by the opponent, it can target a dark dragon or dark plant in the player's grave and summon it. Up next, we have two Predaplant tuners, Longanethla and Banksy Ogre. If Longanethla is summoned, it can add a Predap card from the deck to the hand. It can be banished from the grave to either place a Predator counter on an opponent's face-up monster, or set Polymerization from the grave or banishment. Banksy Ogre can summon itself from the hand by triggering an opponent's monster with a Predator counter. If it's sent from the field to the grave, it can place Predator counters on each face-up opponent monster. Finally, we reach the Predapendulums. Predaplants Buffalicula, Spider Orchid, and Triantis. If Buffalicula is sent to the grave or the face-up extra deck because it was fusion material, it can add a face-up Dark Pendulum from the extra deck to the hand except itself. Once per turn in the Pendulum Zone, Buffalicula can conduct a Dark Fusion summon using monsters from the hand or field. During the end phase of a turn that Spider Orchid was summoned, it can discard a plant to search a level for a lower plant. During the main phase of a turn that Spider Orchid was set in the Pendulum scale, it can target a face-up back row and destroy it. While Triantis is in the Pendulum Zone, if the player fusion summons a Dark Fusion, Triantis allows the monsters in the player's Pendulum Zones to be used as fusion material. If it's sent to the grave or added to the extra deck face-up because it was used as fusion material, Triantis can choose monsters on the field up to the number of monsters either player controls and place a Predator counter on each. Then, one last time, since all four are merged into one, we have three Pendulums from Yuya's collection to aid strategies in this deck: Purple Poison Magician, Performapal Odd-Eyes Dissolver, and Odd-Eyes Persona Dragon. Purple Poison is always treated as a fusion dragon card, and if it's destroyed, it can target and destroy a face-up card on the field. Once per turn, if the player's Dark Spellcaster battles while it's in the Pendulum Zone, Purple Poison can boost that monster by 1200 attack points until the end of the damage step, then destroy itself. Once per turn as a Pendulum scale, Performapal Odd-Eyes Dissolver can conduct a Dragon Fusion summon. At the start of the damage step, if a Pendulum battles the opponent's monster, Odd-Eyes Dissolver can summon itself from the hand, then that Pendulum can't be destroyed by that battle. During the main phase as a monster, Odd-Eyes Dissolver can conduct a fusion summon using monsters from the field and Pendulum Zones, including itself. Once per turn as a quick effect while it's a monster, Odd-Eyes Persona Dragon can target a face-up monster summoned from the extra deck and negate its effects for the turn. Once per turn during the end phase as a Pendulum scale, if the opponent activated a card or effect that targeted exactly one Odd-Eyes Pendulum monster the player controlled, Persona Dragon can special summon itself, then place a face-up Odd-Eyes Pendulum from the extra deck in the Pendulum Zone, except itself. For the back row, we'll start with Polymerization and Fusion Substitute, which is also always treated as Polymerization. Fusion Substitute does the same as the original, but can only use monsters from the field. Fusion Substitute can be banished from the grave to return a fusion from the grave to the extra deck to draw a card. Up next, we have Fusion Recycling Plant. Once per turn, it can discard a card to add Polymerization from the deck or grave to the hand. Once per turn during the end phase, it can add a monster that was used as fusion material from the grave to the hand. For more fusion summoning, we'll first look at Instant Fusion, Double Fusion, and Fusion Duplication. Instant Fusion pays 1000 life points to summon a level 5 or lower fusion from the extra deck, but it can't attack and it's destroyed as the end of the turn, though it is still treated as a proper fusion summon. Double Fusion pays 500 life points to conduct a fusion summon, then it can immediately conduct a second. Fusion Duplication can target and banish a fusion or polymerization normal or quick play spell from either graveyard to apply that spell's effect when it's activated. Then we get to 3 fusion spells that can hold absurd powers in the Yugiverse: Super Polymerization, Ultra Polymerization, and the new Apex Polymerization. Neither player can activate any cards or effects in response to the activation of any of these cards. Super Polymerization is a quick play fusion that discards a card to conduct a fusion summon using monsters from either field. The latter two require a payment of 2000 life points apiece to activate. Ultra Polymerization fusion summons using exactly 2 monsters the player controls. It can be banished from the grave to target a fusion monster summoned by this effect, and summon back all of the listed fusion materials that were used for its summon, but change their attack and defense to 0 and negate their effects. Apex Polymerization targets a face-up effect monster on the field, then summons a monster with the same type and attribute from the extra deck, but with a different level. Then, it either has to send the summoned monster to the grave, or perform a fusion summon using both the summoned monster and the target as materials. For one last fusion spell, at least for the time being, we have Predaprime Fusion. If a Predaplant is on the field, it can conduct a Dark Fusion summon using monsters from either field, including 2 or more Dark monsters the player controls. And this leads us to the rest of the back row, all of which follow the Predap naming scheme. Starting with the normal spells, we have Predapractice, alongside the new Predaprimitive and Thorn Fangs of Violet Poison, which is always treated as a Predap card. Predapractice summons a Predaplant from the hand, then adds a Predap card from the deck to the hand, but the player can only fusion summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Predaprimitive sends a Predap card from the deck to the grave to search a polymerization spell or fusion spell, but the player can only summon plants and dragons for the rest of the turn. If a monster is specialed to the opponent's field, Predaprimitive can be banished from the grave to target a fusion the player controls and destroy it. Thorn Fangs of Violet Poison targets a Starving Venom fusion dragon the player controls. It can't attack for the rest of the turn, but it destroys as many monsters the opponent controls with less attack than that monster. Then it can discard the player's hand to burn the opponent for the combined attack of the destroyed monsters. For the other 3 spells, we have Predaplast, Predaponics, and Predapruning. Plast reveals any number of Predap cards in the hand, then targets an equal number of face-up monsters the opponent controls, and places a Predator counter on each. If a Predaplant would be destroyed in battle, Predaplast can be banished from the grave instead. Once per turn, Predaponics can summon a low-level Predaplant from the hand or grave with its effects negated. Each standby phase, the player has to either pay 800 life points or destroy Predaponics. Predapruning summons a Predaplant from the grave and equips to it, and if it leaves the field, it destroys that monster. Rounding out the main deck, we have 2 Predap traps, Predaplanting and Predaplanet. Planning is a normal trap that sends a Predaplant from the deck to the grave, then it places a Predator counter on each face-up monster on the field. If the player fusion summons a Dark monster while Planning is in the grave, it can be banished to target and destroy a card on the field. Predaplanet is a continuous trap. If a monster with a Predator counter leaves the field while it's face up, it can search a Predap card, but it can only use that effect once each turn. Planet can be banished from the grave to conduct a fusion summon using Predaplants from the hand or field. Starting off the side deck, we have Drosselia the Blood Tree Dragon Princess, a dark plant tuner that can work pretty well alongside Predaplants. She can be summoned by sending a low-level plant from the deck to the grave, then she matches its level. By banishing herself and a plant from the grave, she can summon a dragon from the hand or graveyard. During the turn that either of her effects are used, the player can only summon dragons and plants. Not like that's much of an issue anyways. The rest of the side deck is going to focus solely on fusion, since it's kind of Yuri's whole deal. Dragon's Mirror fusion summons a dragon by banishing materials from the field or graveyard. Fusion Recovery adds a polymerization and a monster that was used as fusion material from the grave to the hand. Odd Eyes fusion summons a dragon using monsters from the hand or field, but if the opponent controls 2 or more monsters and the player controls none, the player can also use up to 2 Odd Eyes monsters from the extra deck as material. Speaking of pendulums, we have 2 fusion spells that relate to that summon type, Pendulum Fusion and Dowsing Fusion. Pendulum Fusion conducts a fusion summon using monsters the player controls as material, but it can also use cards in the Pendulum Zone if both are occupied. Dowsing Fusion conducts a fusion summon by banishing pendulums from the graveyard. Due to some new support and the fact that Yugo is absorbed by Yuri, there's also now good reason to play Harmonic Synchro Fusion, which uses the same 2 monsters to conduct both a fusion and a synchro summon, but the player can only summon fusions and synchros from the extra deck that turn. Greater Polymerization conducts a fusion summon using 3 or more monsters from the hand or field. The summoned monster can't be destroyed by card effects and deals piercing damage. Penetration Fusion can conduct a fusion summon using monsters from the hand and field if a monster was destroyed by battle that turn. The summoned monster gains a quick effect that allows it to tribute itself to boost another monster by 500 attack points. Flash Fusion conducts a fusion summon using monsters from the field, but the summoned monster is destroyed at the end of the turn. For some of Yuri's fusions, this can actually work to his advantage. Necro Fusion conducts a fusion summon by banishing materials from the grave face down, and the summoned monster can't attack the turn it was played. Defusion returns a fusion to the extra deck, and summons its listed materials from the grave if they're still there. Refusion pays 800 life points to summon and equip itself to a fusion from the grave, but if it's destroyed, the equipped monster is banished. Battle Fusion can be used during a battle involving the player's fusion monster. allowing the player's monster to gain the attack points of the opponent's monster for the damage stat. And lastly, Fusion Gate is another field spell that lets the player freely fusion summon by banishing materials from the hand or field. Onto the extra deck, we'll start off with the Predaplant fusions. We have Predaplants Ambulomelodus, Chimeraflegia, Dragostapelia, and Trifiovertum. Ambulomelodus can be summoned with 2 Predaplants, though its level also makes it the designated instant fusion target for the deck. If it's fusion summoned, Ambulomelodus can search a Predap card from the deck, grave, or face-up extra deck. It can tribute a monster the player controls, or a monster with a predator counter on the opponent's field to summon a Predaplant from the deck. Chimeraflesia is summoned using a Predaplant and a Dark monster. Once per turn, it can target a monster with an equal or lower level and banish it. When an attack is declared involving it and an opponent's face-up monster, it can make that monster lose 1000 attack to gain 1000 attack for the turn. Once per turn during the next standby phase after it was sent to the grave, it can add a fusion or polymerization spell from the deck to the hand. Dragostapelia is summoned using a fusion monster and a dark monster. Once per turn during either player's turn, it can target an opponent's monster and place a predator counter on it. When an opponent's activated monster effect resolves, it's negated if it has a predator counter. Trifiovertum is summoned using 3 dark monsters on the field, and gains attack points equal to the combined attack of all other monsters on the field with predator counters. It has 2 effects that it can use once each turn. When the opponent summons a monster from the extra deck while the player controls a fusion summoned Trifiovertum, it can negate the summon and destroy that monster. If the opponent controls a monster with a predator counter, Trifiovertum can be summoned from the grave in defense mode. Predaplants have evolved beyond fusion, however, and now have a Synchro monster and a Link monster. Predaplants Balthea and Verte Anaconda. Verte Anaconda might be banned in modern formats, but I really don't think Yuri would care about that honestly. If you really want something to swap it out for, swap out one of the side decks for a Ready Fusion, which can summon a level 6 non-effect fusion monster from the extra deck for 1000 life points, then swap out Verte Anaconda for Rose Spectre of Dun, a level 6 Dark Plant non-effect fusion monster. On to what the cards do. If Balthea is Synchro summoned, it can summon a Predaplant or Starving Venom monster from the face-up extra deck or grave. If a monster is summoned from the opponent's grave, Balthea can banish itself in a polymerization from the grave to perform a fusion summon using monsters from the hand or field. Verte Anaconda can be summoned with any 2 effect monsters, and it can use each of its effects once per turn. It can target a face-up monster on the field and make it dark for the turn. Verte can also pay 2000 life points and send a polymerization or fusion normal or quick play spell from the deck or grave to copy its effect when that card is activated, but the player can't special summon for the rest of the turn after that. Before we get to the Starving Venom cards, let's first look at Starving Venomy Dragon, who just barely doesn't fall into the archetype. It's summoned using a Dark monster and a Pendulum monster. It can target an opponent's face-up monster to change its name to that monster's name, and gain that monster's effects, then that monster loses 500 attack and defense, its effects are negated, and the opponent takes 500 points of damage. If it's destroyed in the monster zone, Starving Venomy can move to an open Pendulum zone. Each time a card is sent from the field to the grave while Venomy is in the Pendulum zone, it gains a Venomy counter for each card sent. All monsters on the field beside Dark Dragons lose 200 attack for each Venomy counter it has. Once per turn in the Pendulum Zone, Starving Venomy Dragon can reduce damage from a battle to 0. This monster has an evolution in Starving Venomy Lethal Dose Dragon. It's summoned using 3 Dark Pendulums. As a monster, it has the same continuous effect that the previous form had as a pendulum regarding the Venomy counters. Once per turn, Lethal Dose can negate the effects of all face-up opponent monsters for the turn. If it's destroyed in the monster zone, it can move to an open Pendulum Zone. Once per turn during the main phase in the Pendulum Zone, Lethal Dose Dragon can place a Venomy counter on each face-up opponent monster. All monsters on the field, except Dark Dragons, lose 200 attack for each Venomy counter on the field. Now that that little detour is done, we can move to Yuri's Ace Monster. Let's graft these plants together to create a botanical nightmare! Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. It's summoned using 2 dark monsters on the field besides tokens. When fusion summoned, it gains attack equal to an opponent's special summoned monster for the turn. Once per turn, it can target an opponent's high-level monster to copy its name and effects. If Starving Venom Fusion Dragon is destroyed, it can destroy all of the opponent's special summoned monsters. This monster has a retrain as one of the first ever Frame Break cards. Starving Venom Fusion Dragon of the Four Heavenly Dragons. It's summoned using 2 dark monsters on the field, and is always treated as a Predaplant card. If it's special summoned, it can target another face-up monster on the field, change its attack to 0, negate its effects, and make its attribute dark. When the opponent activates a card or effect, this new Starving Venom can respond by fusion summoning using dark monsters from either field, including itself. With one more quick detour, seeing as how Yuri did defeat Yugo and absorb his presence, even before all of them were reunited as Zark, Yuri has access to his Clear Wing Synchro Dragon. Once per turn, when another high-level monster on the field activates its effects, Clear Wing can negate the activation and destroy it. Once per turn, when a monster effect targets a high-level monster on the field and no other cards, Clear Wing can negate the activation and destroy it. If Clear Wing's effect destroys a monster, it gains that monster's original attack points for the turn. Starving Venom can fuse with other Dimension Dragon counterparts, namely Odd Eyes and Clear Wing, to summon either Odd Eyes Venom Dragon or Starving Venom Wing Dragon. Odd Eyes Venom Dragon is summoned using a Starving Venom monster and an Odd Eyes monster, and must be fusion summoned before it can be pendulum summoned. Once per turn, it can target a face-up monster the opponent controls to gain its attack points, name, and effects. If it's destroyed in the monster zone, Odd Eyes Venom Dragon can summon a monster from the Pendulum Zone, then move into an open Pendulum Zone. Once per turn in the Pendulum Zone, Odd Eyes Venom Dragon can target a fusion the player controls to boost it by 1,000 attack points for each monster the opponent controls for the turn. Starving Venom Wing Dragon is summoned using any fusion monster and a Clear Wing monster. Once per turn, if the opponent special summons face-up monsters, it can target one of them to gain that monster's attack points and negate its effects. Once per turn, when another card on the field is activated, Wing Dragon can destroy a card on the field. If it's destroyed, it can move to the Pendulum Zone. In the Pendulum Zone, each time a monster is summoned to the opponent's field, it can place a Predator counter on each. But Starving Venom Fusion Dragon does also have evolutions of its own, without the other Dimension Dragons, such as Greedy Venom Fusion Dragon, summoned using a Predaplant monster and a Dark monster whose original level is 8 or higher, which will usually be Starving Venom, though it could theoretically be summoned with Helium Forhinkus or Odd Eyes Dissolver. It must first be fusion summoned. Once per turn, it can target a face-up monster on the field, change its attack to 0, and negate its effects. If Greedy Venom is destroyed, it can destroy as many monsters on the field as possible, and banish a level 8 or higher Dark monster from the player's grave to summon itself back. But the Fusion Dimension Dragon has one higher evolution, Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon, which is also always treated as a Predaplant card. It's summoned using 2 fusion monsters, at least one of which must be dark. Once per turn when a card or effect is activated, Predapower can tribute a monster on either field with a Predator counter to negate the activation. If it's fusion summoned and sent to the grave by the opponent, it can summon a dark monster from the player's grave. And that's going to wrap things up for this Yuri character deck profile. If you'd like to hear an explanation of the cards in this list and why certain cards were left out, keep watching. Greetings, I am Wham Bam Duel, and welcome to the explanation segment. To those new to the channel, you may have noticed that the profile segment was rather similar to the deck profiles made by Spell Commander 91. This is on purpose though, as he and I are frequent collaborators, and we decided to bring everybody more deck profiles by splitting up some of the work. So to visiting viewers, welcome, and to everybody else, welcome back. When it comes to Yuri's deck, I've continued to use the same justification that I have for the previous Zark fragments, in that these are post-merge deck profiles to give each character access to merged variants of their respective Dimension Dragon with another. As for cards that are missing, the only Yuri-adjacent card not here is Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom. As I explained in the Yugo video, I'm waiting for Xyz and Fusion Universe variants of Zark before I commit to a full Supreme King package for each U-Boy. Yugo just got lucky, I guess. But besides that, every Predaplant and Starving Venom monster is here. I feel pretty confident in just giving Yuri a buttload of fusion cards as well. Dracella is here because she was revealed alongside the new Predaplants as they were being revealed. Being a dark plant that's a free summon, she feels right at home in the deck, I assure you. Same goes for the new Apex Polymerization and Penetration Fusion, which, man, we all know this card's name is gonna change when it comes to the TCG. If not, I can only imagine how many people are gonna swarm the big Yugi tubers at YCSs begging them to sign it. But I'm getting off track here. let's talk about the selection for the Yuri cards. Obviously, gonna do Purple Poison because I did the previous Dimension Dragon Magicians for the other two, but I wanted to include Odd Eye's Dissolver since its monster effect is kind of tailor-made to summoning Starving Venom, what with the Pendulum Zones being on the field for its summoning condition and all. Or, if Starving Venom is already available, it can instead be used to make Odd Eye's Venom Dragon. Speaking of Odd Eyes, I also wanted to include a Dragon-type Odd Eyes variant in this list, as I've done for the other U-Boys. Phantom was tailored to Yuto as it needed to be level 7 for his high-ranked Xyz, and Mirage was tailored to Yugo as it needed to be level 3 or lower to work with Odd Eyes Synchron's Revive effect. For Yuri though, it just needed to be a Dragon-type Odd Eyes Pendulum monster not used in the previous profiles. Those were my only constraints. Arc Pendulum and Revolution don't really work well with this deck, and Phantasma is a little too battle-focused in its monster effect for what I was looking for. It'd feel like it was taking away from the Starving Venom suite, in my opinion. Honestly, Odd Eye's persona just feels to be the most correct to me. Its monster effect is a fun little quick effect negate that Yuri can use to annoy people, and while its pendulum effect will only work on Dissolver and Odd Eye's Venom Dragon, it's still workable, and sets up its negate again, so I'm fine with it. All I can really talk about now is maybe the fusion cards that aren't here, though there are already so many in this deck profile, I just don't. Surprise Fusion is another new fusion card that was revealed alongside Apex and Penetration, but all of Yuri's monsters are already the correct type and attribute to fusion summon with. His cards even change the attributes of opposing monsters to make them easier to fuse with. Sure, the 2 surprise tokens can be used to summon the new Frame Break Starving Venom, but even then, it's not like Predaplants aren't already a great swarming strategy that can summon it without this card anyways. I checked if Miracle Synchro Fusion could work with Clear Wing Synchro Dragon to make Starving Venom Wing Dragon, but the answer is no. Starving Venom Wing Dragon doesn't specifically list it, and instead just lists any Clear Wing monster. Heavy Polymerization is another one I considered, but unless you're specifically using it for the utility of fusing from your extra deck, Greater Polymerization is just better. The Achilles heel of this card is that it has to use 3 or more materials, so you can't just play it, dump a Fusion and Clear Wing, and pull out Starving Venom Wing Dragon, unfortunately. And after looking through all of the back row that mentions Fusion Summon in their text again, I really do think that just about does it. All other fusion cards not mentioned are either archetypal in some way, or just belong to another character. And of course, as mentioned earlier, if you want to play a legal version of this deck, I'd personally swap out Verte Anaconda for Rose Spectre of Dun, and then toss out a card in the side deck, probably Dowsing Fusion for my choice, and then add in a copy of Ready Fusion to summon that free level 6 Dark Plant Fusion. But that's just about going to wrap it up here. Let me know what you think of the profile. Till next time, I've been Wham Bam Duel. I'm always happy to see ya.